So let's just jump straight in, and I'm hoping that you managed to have a look at the Exodus references from the prep book, and maybe what we could do is just answer this big question. So how does Mark ensure that his reader is thinking Exodus as they read these verses? So we're just looking at the verses that we've just read. So leave Herod behind, just looking at these verses. So anything that makes you think Exodus, especially for the readers at the time, they would have probably been a little more familiar with Exodus than us. So I think there's a few different answers, so just shout out whatever you think. Give it a go.
The first thing I said was when Jesus saw the crowd by the lake, and he said that they're like sheep without a shepherd. So that's the big thing that stuck out to me.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you, Anne. Anything else? Anything else? I think there are a few different things. So we've got sheep without a shepherd, for sure.
Well, what about the fact that he's asking them to come to a desolate place to rest?
Mm-hmm.
Like when they, like, isn't it right after Exodus is when they, or, I mean, I guess it was already there, but the whole like rest on the seventh day and the Sabbath, like in Egypt, they didn't have that. They had to work all the time.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of that one. That's a good one, Kendra. Yeah, okay, yeah. So the idea of rest being a kind of newly introduced seventh day rest, kind of 10 Commandments kind of thing. Yeah. Anything else? I thought you were going to say something else actually in that one. Did anyone pick up on the desolate place idea? Lots of nods. Who wants to? Judy, do you want to help us with the desolate place?
Yeah, a few times he talks about them being in a desolate place, so it's comparative to the wilderness in the Old Testament. And yeah.
What's the wilderness in Exodus all about? Why are they in the wilderness? Where are they? What's going on?
They were, I'm trying to remember from the verses I read, they were well, they had left Egypt, and so they were out in the wilderness and had no water and no food. And
Brilliant. Anyone else want to add in any? I don't know what the word would be. Exodusian. What would it be?
I loved the question, learning about the Jesus passing by them and God passing by Moses in the rock. Did not know that, so it's really cool.
That's a really big one, isn't it? Yeah. And did anyone spot the other one in those verses?
This is kind of a different one, but along the same lines, when the disciples said, are we going to go buy enough? Like, how can we possibly buy enough?
Mm-hmm.
When Moses was supposed to feed the people in Numbers 11, he said, shall flocks and herds be slaughtered for them and be enough for them, or shall all the fish of the sea be gathered together for them and be enough for them? Just kind of the same idea. I'm like totally overwhelmed.
Yeah.
Way too much.
Yeah, wonderful. That's a great reference. Yeah, absolutely.
Also going. Oh, I was just going to say going up on the mountain to pray.
Yeah,
that's another reference to Exodus.
Yeah. Just help us with that. Like, where do we see a mountain in Exodus?
I mean, Moses. It's like God's mountain where he speaks to people, pretty much. Yeah.
Where the God business happens. Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you. Okay, so we've got loads, and just one more. Did anyone get the other one in the verses 45 to 52? Anyone spot? There's another big one in there.
I mean, the one you gave us, the "It is I"
statement.
Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah.
I thought maybe I was wrong, but when he divided the two fish, kind of like how Moses divided the sea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I wondered about the sea as well. That actually they get in a boat. Moses and Israel, they get in a boat to get there. So there's almost a kind of echo of that as well. There's just a whole lot of Exodus in it, isn't there? It's one of those things that when you're reading the Bible like this, it's kind of like quite exciting to spot the allusions. But then it's kind of, well, what do you do with the allusion? Like, what's the point in having an Old Testament kind of allusion? And one of the big things to think is, well, the writer, the Bible writer, will be bringing in what that Old Testament writer was doing. So we need to establish what Exodus is all about. So can anyone help us to see the big story of Exodus? If you had to summarize it for someone, what keywords, what's the big story of Exodus? What's it all about?
Deliverance and redemption of God's people, Israel.
Brilliant. Yeah. So deliverance and redemption of God's people. Anyone want to add anything else into that?
And you get the covenant, and then so he redeems, and then he shows them how to obey.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So living with him as Lord. Yeah. Anything else?
Well, it's also a division of God's people. You had those that in disobedience fell in the desert.
Mm-hmm.
So here with Christ coming, there was going to be a huge division in the people of Israel, those who would accept him as the Messiah and those that fell away from the promise.
Yeah.
Enter his rest.
Yeah. It's big, isn't it, that actually? Lots get left behind.
Yeah.
But lots get carried through as well, and not just the people then, but the promises for the future people, isn't it? Yeah. And so, and I just think maybe the other big thing is just God himself. So God himself rescues his people, doesn't he? He takes them to the promised land. And that's probably a big thing, kind of geographically speaking. They're in the desert, they're in the wilderness. They are being taken by God to the promised land. So that would be a kind of big thing. That's really helpful. Okay, so that's what is being kind of imported into Mark's narrative. So what's the deal? Like, what is Mark hoping to bring to mind as we read the feeding of the 5,000? It's a big question. Anyone? I mean, there's lots of different possible things to say.
I think one big one would be the miracle of the manna,
Mm-hmm.
not having food, not having bread. And then, here Jesus is, which is just a foreshadowing of him, the bread of life. But like, he's like making that connection that like these shadows, I'm the light. Like these things, like I'm that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, fantastic. We didn't even mention the bread actually, did we? The bread is a big Exodus thing, as you say.
Yeah.
The manna. Yeah. So God provides. That's what, in that bread thing, it's God providing, isn't it? It looks like there's nothing. God provides the manna, and God provides the bread here. Yep. What else? Why is he going big?
Covenant as well could be a big thing too. In Exodus, God gives the first covenant, and here we know that Jesus has already called the disciples up to the mountain, like that realization of, well, this is the second covenant with the 12 disciples.
Yeah.
Then they've been sent out, and here, I don't know, there's like another illusion of like, this is the working of the second covenant.
Okay, yeah. So and almost a kind of identity of like God's people. So yeah, this crowd. So almost the crowd, the 5,000, in some way, are representing the crowd from before. Although it's a bit different, isn't it? Because the 5,000 are not all disciples, they're not all going to be followers, but there's definitely this element of a crowd of people, and Jesus is he's providing for them. Yeah.
I was going to say, is it like Jesus is like the better Moses? It's like Jesus doing what Moses did, but also he's leading like Moses led, but he himself is also the
Okay. So why, like, so that's great, Liz. So push it a bit further. Where does it then leave us? So he's doing what Moses was doing, but more. What's the more? Like, what's the better bit of that?
Are you asking me?
I mean, anyone.
Anyone.
But feel free to answer.
I mean, he identifies himself as it, where Moses went up and says, I talked to I am. He's saying things, he's doing what Moses did, but in the process he's saying, I am.
Yeah, I am God. So this is God doing, like, leading his. When we were just doing the big story of Exodus, there are a few words that cropped up. We had God, we had kind of deliverance, rescue, that kind of idea. We had the wilderness thing, so being taken to the promised land. Any of those, how does that help us to explain what's going on in the feeding of the 5,000? So we're getting there. We've got that Jesus is declaring himself to be a better Moses, better to the extent that he is actually God himself, is providing for his people. We see that in the bread. What is he actually providing for his people? If previously in Exodus it's been he's taking them, he's giving them enough to get them to the promised land, what's going on here?
I think, yeah, that's really good. You're good at setting people up. It's like he's giving enough, because I totally wasn't thinking that. But yeah, he's like giving them enough until he can feed their bread. Like it's like the manna was a daily kind of thing, and then it had its time.
Yeah. And where's he taking them? Because it actually,
it's foreshadowing kind of to Passover, where he broke the bread, communion, like, this is my body, take it, eat.
brilliant. And what does that achieve? So what is Jesus's death? Essentially, that's what you're talking about, isn't it? Jesus' death. What does that achieve for his people? Where does it land them up?
We're back to redemption.
Yeah. And
I don't know if this is like what you're looking for, but when he said, I'm the bread of life, so now he becomes the bread of heaven. And he says, they had manna in the desert, but they still died, but I'm going to be the bread of life, and whoever eats of me will live forever. It's almost like with the feeding, we've been talking about parables being a way to communicate with those who believe and to not reveal too much to those who don't. And they were kind of like participating in an actual parable by being part of the feeding of this group. It was a living,
like
choreographed parable.
Yeah. Okay, so Jane, that's really helpful to the kind of the taking them to eternal life. So in Exodus, we have a big rescue happening. Yes. In the feeding of the 5,000, if the big word in Exodus is God rescues, you could kind of summarize Exodus as God rescues. Here we have Jesus, God, rescuing, that's the big word, rescuing his people. Do you see that's what he's saying? By bringing in all the Exodus stuff, so all the better Moses, the the promised land, the manna to get us there. The manna itself is not, the bread itself is not actually the big deal, is it? That is actually a provision to get you to there. So as he breaks the bread, as he gives the bread, that is the kingdom kind of stuff. Do you see how that works? Let's just dig into one more Old Testament reference and see if it helps with what's going on. So Ezekiel 34 is a big thing in this. And was it Kendra who talked about Anne who talked about the sheep and the shepherd? So if I just read 6 verse 34 to you while you find Ezekiel 34. So Mark says, when he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And he began to teach them many things. And if you flick back to Ezekiel 34, I think rather than us read it out loud, because that just takes quite a long time, let's just have a quick skim through it, particularly the first kind of half of it, the first 2/3. And what we're looking for is what we learn of the shepherds and the sheep and what God is going to do. So the shepherds, the sheep, and what God is going to do. So have a quick look, a couple of minutes on your own. Don't go to Kings. Don't go all the way back to Kings. It takes too long. Don't go all the way back to Kings. Just go with Ezekiel 34. Okay. And get them just to shout out anything. Okay. Otherwise it just takes forever.
Okay. I was looking at you as another time.
Well, everybody, wherever you've got to, you're doing well. It's a lot of text, isn't it? Just go big on the question. So just like, how does Exodus help us to see what's going on in the feeding 5,000? How does Ezekiel 34, how does it just help us to understand that more? Try and summarize that, and then go to the big picture. So you should be able to summarize it. Make sure you can summarize what's going on, what the big kind of wow factor is, and then have a go at the so what questions. I know it's a race through Old Testament. Okay, so anyone want to shout out anything? What do we learn about the current shepherds of Israel?
They're not doing their job.
They're not doing their job. Exactly. So what does that mean? They're not doing their job?
They're not taking care of the sheep. The
Okay.
sheep are scattered.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we've got scattered, neglected sheep. Anything else about the sheep? What is God going to do? What is the Ezekiel promise that God is going to do?
Verse 15, he says, I myself will be the shepherd of my sheep, and I myself will make them lie down, declares the Lord God. I will seek the lost, and I will bring back the strayed, and I will bind up the injured, and I will strengthen the weak, and the fat and the strong I will destroy. I will feed them in justice.
It's a huge promise, isn't it? It's a wonderful, wonderful promise. And then actually, if you flick down to verse 24, 23, I will set up over them one shepherd, my servant David, and he shall feed them. He shall feed them and be their shepherd, and I, the Lord, will be their God. And my servant David shall be prince among them. I am the Lord, I have spoken. And what is it? When we read David, what do we immediately think about shepherd? Yeah, so David, Jesus being of the line of David. So that's a pretty big kind of expansion of 6:34. Anyone want to comment? Anyone want to help us to see how that helps us to understand the feeding of the 5,000?
Yeah, like Jane said, this is like it's a parable. Like it almost feels like the same, kind of like passage almost. They were hungry. They were spiritually hungry. The Pharisees, the rulers of the synagogue, like they were not feeding them, and here they are, willing to go into the wilderness where they know they have no food. Like they're not forced, but they're desperate, they're hungry, they're lost, and here Jesus is having compassion and feeding them.
Yeah. Anyone want to add to that? So if we add in, so we've got the Exodus 34 stuff, and if we add in the Exodus, so we've got Ezekiel 34 stuff, and if we add in the Exodus stuff, we have really the shepherd rescuer is going to rescue his people to the kingdom, really, haven't we? Like that's where he's taking them, where it's a bigger, better rescue than Exodus, because this is beyond that. This is to the new creation. This is to be with Jesus. So the shepherd king is rescuing his people. God himself is fulfilling this promise, the Ezekiel 34 promise, and he's kind of neon signing it through the feeding of the 5,000. Do you see that? Do you see the wow factor? So
I've never seen all this, honestly, when the feeding of the 5,000. This was really amazing.
Yeah, it's mind-blowing, isn't it? I really think the walking on the water bit just kind of is like the icing on the top. It's like you see the rescue in the feeding the 5,000, then you see that bit like, oh, and he's definitely God. This is God rescuing his people. Jesus is the way these people are going to be rescued.
I love in verse 52, it like gives so much more meaning when Jesus says like, take heart, it is I, don't be afraid. When you think of like God, Yahweh God from Exodus saying in Ezekiel and Jeremiah being like, I'm done with those shepherds, I'll just be the shepherd and I'll bring them back and I'll be compassionate and you'll have what you need. And it's just like this really harsh but really compassionate promise to Israel. And then when Jesus says, it's I, do not be afraid, I think I always chalk that up to just miracle and like calming, chilling, like, I don't know, anxious and afraid people, but really it's like, whoa, God is so kind. Yeah.
And it's so true to who we've seen be all the way through the gospel. I feel like we've used the word compassionate and kind, humble quite a lot. Okay, so let's just move on to kind of thinking about the implications of that. So I think this is one that we have just raced through that. Take the time to go back and just kind of dwell on it, consider it, be persuaded all the more, be made to go, wow. So, and a big question that comes out, I think, is, well, then how does this passage then enlarge our view of Jesus? So how does it make us? And these will be things that we've already kind of said, but it's really helpful just to say them again. So we're trying to help each other have a bigger view of Jesus through what we've just read. So how does this help us to have a big view of Jesus?
What do you think it means in 52 where it says, for they did not understand about the loaves? So this is, after Jesus gets in the boat with them, but their hearts were hardened. Do you think that's just a period where God didn't open their eyes and open their hearts so that they understood when Jesus made the proclamation that he is, I am who I am?
Yeah. That's a great question, Linda. And it's the same thing, isn't it? And we had this back in the last passage. It's a bit puzzling that the disciples are just a bit behind the curve on what's going on.
Well, I was totally blown away by the note in the preparation that's described that what we translate in English is, it is I, is translated
I am.
Mm.
I had never known or read
Yeah.
that before.
Yeah, and I think the bread here, like it's kind of almost comical, the bread thing, because like they don't understand about the bread. The bread we spent probably 5 minutes of our discussion talking about the bread, because the bread is the manna, the bread is the signal of rescue, the bread is essentially the kingdom, the bread is Jesus himself. Like the fact they don't understand about the loaves, you can imagine them saying, why is he making such a big deal about the bread? Like, is that a big deal? And they're not getting it, and the fact they're not getting it flags up that there's something more to getting it, to following Jesus, than just seeing him in action. And we've been sort of hinting at it all the way through, that the heart is the issue. And we're going to see that in next week's passage. It is all about the heart. And essentially, this is kind of to do with that. But it's exactly the right question. It's so puzzling. Come on, disciples. But really, come on us. Come on our hearts. Run to Jesus. Okay, we've got 5 minutes. So there are two big questions that I think come out of this. How does our view of Jesus get made bigger? And then secondly, how does this impact my view of myself and my need for Jesus' rescue? So you've got a view of Jesus that's made bigger. And you've got a view of myself and my need for rescue. And what go.
Sorry. I was just going to say something that occurs to me just from the Ezekiel passages, is that we really need to go directly to God and not look to anybody here on earth as our shepherd or as our teacher, and because he's just so much more powerful and so much more able to help us along than any person on the earth.
Yeah, although he does then appoint kind of, that's how the church works, isn't it? So this sort of shepherd pastor. So, but what you want then is a shepherd pastor who is listening to the shepherd. So as soon as there's a pastor who's not listening to the shepherd, that's when we have issues. What I'm going to do is actually crazy new thing. I've just learned how to do it. I'm going to put us all into breakout rooms, and what we're going to do is just consider those questions and pray for one another. And I think because we're quite a big group tonight, that might be quite a good thing. I've never done this before, so I'm going to press a button. I don't really know what's going to happen when I press it, but I think it puts us into random groups automatically. Okay, so I think we've just got two. So two rooms, and what you need to do is answer those questions and then just pray for one another. Okay, and then basically go from there. You don't need to. I won't pull you back together. So this is does that make